This is Plant-Based Briefing, how Big Meat worked to rebrand in 2024 using disinformation. Part 2 by Jessica Scott-Reid at sentientmedia.org. And I'm your host, Marian Erickson. This is the curated content plant-based podcast, where I narrate a variety of articles on plant-based and vegan living with permission in about 10 minutes or less every weekday. And this article was longer than that, so it's a two-parter. Go back and listen to part 1 first, yesterday's episode, and then come back here for the second half. So now let's get to today's plant-based briefing. How Big Meat worked to rebrand in 2024 using disinformation. Part 2 by Jessica Scott-Reid at sentientmedia.org. Disinformation trend number 3, meat feeds the world. Inflation and food insecurity were also pressing issues in 2024. Meat, dairy, and egg industries were there to capitalize, particularly at climate conferences held throughout the year. At COP28 last spring, for example, The Guardian reports that meat lobbyists celebrated the cut-through of their message that industrial animal agriculture has an important role to play in addressing global hunger. It adds that U.S. Pork Board Representative Jamie Burr also stated that COPs provide an opportunity for U.S. agriculture groups to show how they feed the world. At COP29 last month, the strategy was the same, according to a report by DeSmog. Documents produced by the industry-funded Global Meat Alliance, obtained by DeSmog, encouraged members to stick to key comms messages, including the idea that meat is beneficial to the environment and will help to feed the world. A spokesperson for the Global Alliance for the Future of Food told The Guardian in April that the idea that industrial agriculture is critical to address hunger is one of the greatest myths used by the industry to fend off criticism. Animal agriculture, in fact, contributes to world hunger due to the inefficient use of arable land and resources to grow crops for animals instead of people. Not only that, but the industry's framing around food insecurity ignores how many climate researchers limit eat less meat recommendations to global north populations like the U.S., who consume far more than the global average. Studies suggest that food insecurity could actually be addressed in part by transitioning to a more plant-based food system. Reducing the massive amount of land needed to grow food to feed livestock could lead to more crops being fed directly to people. One study theorizes that if everyone in the U.S. went vegan, an additional 350 million people could be fed. Disinformation trend number 4, trustworthy academic research supports meat. The year 2024 also saw the meat sector lean even further into academia as a means to appear credible and sustainable. As environmental scientist Jonathan Foley writes for Project Drawdown, the livestock industry has spent enormous sums telling us fictitious stories of environmentally friendly beef, including, he notes, documentaries, think tanks, university labs, and social media influencer campaigns touting so-called solutions to beef's environmental footprint. In 2023, The Guardian exposed the Master of Beef Advocacy, or MBA program, created by the National Cattlemen's Beef Association to help meat promoters influence and educate the public on the sustainability of beef. That same year, the National Pork Board funded a nearly $8.5 million program with researchers from a variety of U.S. universities to research and improve the industry's reputation by boosting public trust in pork farms. And the year prior, the New York Times exposed how the UC Davis Clear Center did not disclose just how much industry funding it received to promote the environmental friendliness of meat and dairy under the guise of public sector science. In 2024, the meat industry took this method of information manipulation a step further, targeting another major competitor, cultivated meat. Once again backed by Richard Berman, another think tank was created, the ironically named Center for the Environment and Welfare, this time under the guise of helping consumers, companies, and stakeholders navigate issues related to sustainability and animal welfare. In 2024, the group conducted research and published media op-eds to thwart the progress of cultivated meat. See details linked here. The bottom line. In 2024, the meat industry's aggressive rebranding efforts, fueled by clever messaging and industry-backed research, sought to counteract competition from more sustainable plant-based alternatives. As the inevitable impacts of climate change, along with other issues like bird flu, usher us into 2025, it's going to be increasingly difficult, Molidor says, for the meat and dairy lobby to rebrand their way out of these serious environmental and human harms. You just listened to How Big Meat Worked to Rebrand in 2024 Using Disinformation, Part 2 by Jessica Scott-Reid at sentientmedia.org. And I'm your host, Marian Erickson. And one thing I want to comment about is under the part about natural meat versus processed plants, they mention that this marketing tactic ignores the fact that 99% of animals raised for food in the U.S. are factory farmed in inherently unnatural conditions. I would argue that the factory farming has nothing to do with natural or unnatural. The fact that animals are farmed at all is what's unnatural. Yes, it has been happening for ages, but that doesn't mean it's natural, normal, or necessary. One of the listeners on YouTube commented on the first half of this episode yesterday, specifically about the dangers of focusing on factory farming as being the problem. They said, if factory farming is the problem we should focus on, then the message that's being put out there is that there's nothing wrong with exploiting animals per se. If that's the case, then factory farming becomes acceptable due to its inevitability, and so we keep going around in circles. And they said that the suggestion seems to be that there's something natural about the 1% of animal farming, making animal farming itself natural. And that's such a good point, because it's animal farming that's the problem, not factory farming of animals. All animal exploitation, not just animal farming, really is the problem. But regarding animal farming in general versus factory farming, if, for example, there was nothing wrong with animal farming, if there is nothing wrong with separating families, if there's nothing wrong with removing babies from their mothers so the mother's milk can be taken for humans, if there is nothing wrong with breeding animals in ways that are against their best interest and for our best interest, breeding them to grow very large very quickly, for example, breeding them to have too much wool, for example, if there's nothing wrong with sending animals to slaughter at a fraction of their natural lifespan because that's the profitable time to do it, these are all industry standard practices in regular animal farming, not just factory farming. If there's nothing wrong with all of that, then animal farming itself becomes normal, and humans will always look for ways to make it more efficient, more profitable. They'll conduct cruel research on animals in order to find more efficient ways to farm them. Check out episodes 393, The Use of Chickens in Agricultural Research, an eye-opening look at unspeakable cruelty, and 137, The Sad Link Between Animal Agriculture and Experiments. I'd also recommend people listen to episode 82, Stop Saying Factory Farming. So please keep all that in mind whenever you hear the term factory farming, or whenever people point their fingers at factory farming being the problem, not animal farming or animal exploitation. And for some other episodes related to the disinformation trends mentioned in the article, you might want to check out 948, What COP29 Had to Say About Food Systems, 643 and 44, 6 greenwashing terms Big Ag is bringing to COP28, 375, Earth Day, We Need an Earth Diet, Scientists Urge, 243, How Grass-Fed Beef is Duping Consumers Again, 843, Homesteading is a viral trend, but butchery gone awry is its dark side, 779, Is climate-friendly beef always just greenwashing, 379, The significant unalloyed goodness of replacing animal agriculture, 819, How the meat industry hooks children, and 772, When big agriculture funds university experts. So please share this episode with anyone who might benefit, and thanks for listening.